Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
Everybody's heard of the Associated Press, but do you have any idea what they're doing in American media today?
So, Michael, I got a story to tell you, and it's a tale of woes. We just got through with this big ballot issue in Ohio, and another one's coming right up in Florida that we're going to be involved in. And, you know, we do ballot issues across the country. And something was bugging me the entire time. The whole year, it was bugging me. And I began to notice that there were two media controlling agencies that were basically dominating every news story, whether it was an online story, whether it was a radio story, whether it was somehow a campaign-related story. It was in print or what newspapers are today in their online versions, USA Today and the Associated Press. So I began to try to figure out what was going on with the Associated Press, because in the past, the Associated Press, particularly in the Columbus News Bureau in Ohio, has been a pretty strong proponent of trying to get both sides right over the years. And again, we've been doing this for 43 years. So I'm digging behind the scenes, and finally, I find out what this is really all about. It's the biggest story that was never covered last year in the news.
December of last year.
So this is just like 11 months old. The Associated Press, they've gone woke. They've partnered with, now Associated Press is a $500 million a year business. It's a nonprofit. It goes back to 1846. Last year, they announced a partnership with 5 left-wing foundations.
You mean with philanthropic support?
Yes, yeah. The money. They're getting their money coming in, and they've created almost an accountability partnership with these 5 agencies, these 5 foundational agencies, all of which have strong left-wing connections and programming.
And deep pocketbooks.
Now, granted, the Associated Press is a very big organization. I see at least one $4 million grant coming in that I can track through the paperwork. We're looking for all the details. And I'm not suggesting that Associated Press is owned and operated because suddenly it's been a fiscal takeover with all the money. But there's a partnership. There's a strategic partnership. Here's how it reads. With philanthropic support from several organizations, AP aims to improve, get this, to improve civic literacy. In other words, we're all stupid, and they're going to help us get smart. And maybe some of that's true.
And orchestrate opinion.
And combat misinformation by bolstering its, here's the word, explanatory journalism, and providing information tools to local newsrooms and aid their coverage. AP will also deepen its reporting on the impact of elections and elected-rated policy on communities of color. Now, it goes on and on from there. Explanatory journalism. Excuse me. Wait a minute. What are you talking about?
Used to be who, what, where, when, why. I don't think that's what they mean.
Yeah, the big 5 questions, right? Just give people the facts and then walk away and let them make up their own decisions. No, now they're going to explain everything to us. And their entire pitch is about democracy. Now, we'll fast forward real quick. So people of Ohio have this big ballot issue, and the abortion side wins 2 million votes to 1.6 million votes. Now, that's a 400,000 vote margin, give or take, which means that if 250,000 votes, I think it might have been a 500,000, was 2.1 million. You split the margin in half, and you say if there was 250,000 people that had voted the other way, then it would have been, the issue would have gone the other way. So you think about a state that has 11 million people, and a ballot issue of this magnitude determines on about 250,000 votes. It's not like the people of Ohio, 8 million registered voters, 8 million came out, and 7 million said yes, and 1 million said no. This isn't even close to that kind of a concept of a blowout of consensus. This isn't a conversation that is clearly a heightened debate with a lot of opinions, and there's nothing even remotely close to unanimity in opinion.
Or you were living in the result of what they were bragging about a year ago.
Well, and so here's what happens. Not only do they completely bias the coverage on this, and their misinformation team refuses to fact check anything that's coming out on the commercials from the other side, Because the fact checks, if they had done the fact checks, we had already done them. We knew what they would find. They wouldn't do them. They wouldn't touch it. They literally carried the water for the vote yes, pro-abortion side, because that was where they were. They brought in experts who were no experts at all. And legal experts from all over the country who had bogus, shallow, ridiculous opinions. We brought forward legal experts who genuinely teach Ohio constitutional law. Zero coverage at all. Not only were we going through that, but here's what happens. So it's it's 2.1 to 1.6 million on the vote. So that means there's a lot of lawmakers whose people aren't happy about this. So the lawmakers are sitting down at the legislature saying, okay, all right, this is a 232-word amendment. It's got a lot of sentences in it. Let's check this out. Maybe there are places where they have made some significant mistakes in this amendment. The people didn't understand that. So they're examining the words and they're looking at how it relates to other pieces of the Constitution. And I got to tell you, an honest legal mind quickly sees, this amendment was written pretty weird, and it crashes with 50 Ohio laws. It crashes with several other constitutional mandates in the Bill of Rights. Boy, I can see a lot of litigation coming on this. So they start talking about it out loud. And the reporters start calling saying, what do you mean? And they're saying, we're looking at this, we're looking at that. And here comes the Associated Press article, basically saying that anyone who is objecting to the recent passage of this constitutional amendment is anti-democratic. They're challenging democracy.
Here's what I found the most troubling. Paragraph 4. Support from Lilly Endowment will enable the AP to emphasize digital and social storytelling that explains topics central to the American democracy. Of course, democracy has devolved into the fringe left of the Democrat Party platform.
It's government by public opinion polls.
Exactly. But they're going to steer it through their Lilly Endowment money, and they're going to dictate the storytelling that explains to you what everything is. Maybe that's what you experienced in your on-the-ground battle. But listen to this. AP will also conduct research into news practices that polarize audiences and identify newsroom solutions to both bridge societal divides and engage weary citizens. So what happens after decades of bias? Agenda-focused biased media. People eventually figure it out. They don't trust it. Now, this is how they want to take the focus from bias to democracy, and then they want to address it this way. With an eye, this is them writing, with an eye on the 2024 election. So they're going to find their principles for journalism in the outcome of the 24 election, not journalism itself. You can't make this up, and they're bragging.
I feel like I'm getting beaten by the nuns again in grade school. They're literally browbeating you. They're hitting you on the hands with the ruler. They're hitting you in the back of the head. They're pulling you by the ear. They're pinching your cheeks. They're coming at you basically saying, if you don't agree with us, you're anti-democratic.
We're going to demonize you.
Yeah. You're and you're stupid. And you're stupid on top of that, because we're the smart people here and we understand. But you go back and you're looking. So let's go look for the track record. Go back to the founding era. And what do you see the people who put this country together talking about when it comes to democracy? Democracy was the worst form of government. That's what the founders believed. They believed that if you ever became a country that was governed by public opinion polls, you were no country at all. You're just a mob. And that's what they witnessed in the French Revolution. That's what they saw coming in the Enlightenment and all that manifested itself in. You can't run a government based on the consent of the governed if every single day, based on the whims of a poll that you take that may or may not be legitimate, you're suddenly going to change your policy and one group becomes the winners and the next become the losers. There's no stability in that. There's no safety in that. There's no security in that.
They weren't interested in monarchy rule. They weren't interested in mob rule. In fact, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think if they were speaking, and they spoke far more eloquently than we do today, they would say an uninformed citizenry is incapable of self-governance and doesn't have the power, the empowerment to hold government accountable. It would be just so crazy. I mean, well, if you imagine starting with a founding father, you walk up to George Washington and say, with our eye on the 18 blank election, they would have
Yeah.
Oh, it would have been so appalling. They would be like, well, you deserve whatever you're getting. I mean,
Yeah. Why don't you? And yeah, there's boats that still leave this country. Maybe you ought to consider getting a ticket. I mean, this is what Washington was so concerned about in 1783 when he wrote from the battlefield as a victorious general who couldn't leave and couldn't dismiss his armies because the paperwork wasn't finished in France on all the treaties. So they had to sit there for months waiting to make certain that the surrender of Cornwallis was really the last word and the king was going to, and the parliament. So they had to get all paperwork done. It took a while. And while he was there, Washington wrote his circular letter to the states, which is one of the most famous pieces of writing in American history that no one's ever read, in which he talked about the essence of the American character, the idea that this was our country and that we would have to learn how to think well and how to treat one another well to develop the national character to sustain it. Now, in that sense, he was a complete Democrat with a little d. The idea that this is our country and that we each bear an equal responsibility for the health and the character of this country. That's what they meant by democracy. The form of government that we have, however, was a representative republic because these guys were realists. They were not utopians.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
How important is this to the Founding Fathers? Not granting the power, but acknowledging a God-given right. They put it in the First Amendment, right with freedom of religion and right with freedom of speech.
How is that for courage? How is that for courage?
Can you have a self-governed, constitutional, representative, government of laws republic without freedom of religion, without freedom of speech, and without freedom of press? Well, guess what? You've abandoned God. How's that working? You've abandoned press. How's that working? I mean, have we gone from death of journalism into the decomposition of the body that was once journalism?
Well, we're in trouble. We are in deep trouble, especially when you consider that the Associated Press is one of the oldest, probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, functioning news agencies. It was the first, and so it's got to be the oldest. Now, there are other organizations that have been around as long, like the New York Times and others, but this is a very significant player in the American news business, and they are basically surrendering their sense of objectivity and history and saying, we are now going to partner with people who are agenda-driven, and we are going to drive an agenda. That, forget whatever the agenda is. I don't care if the agenda was for range-free chickens. It doesn't matter. When a news agency says, we are now going to partner with agenda-driven foundations, and those people have the right to exist. They're not evil. But we are now going to partner with them for the influencing of public opinion across the board and all news agencies and all social media, so that the way we see elections, the way we see democracy is the way everyone's supposed to see it. Now, that is truly problematic. If they were a local newspaper in Philadelphia or in Virginia back in the colonial era, and they wanted to publish their own newspaper and put their own opinions out there, people could buy it or not buy it, take it or leave it. No. This is a nonprofit organization that masquerades as the height of objectivity, and they are now the exact opposite.
And more Americans are now getting their news from TikTok, bucking a trend of other social media sites over the last 3 years. The share of U.S. adults who say they regularly get their news from TikTok has more than quadrupled from 3% to 14%, which is, by the way, not significant unless by 2025 it quadruples again and it's half of America. You know, part of the reason I bring that up is they don't get away with it. With their loss of objectivity and with their bias comes the loss of trust, and then the loss of viewership or listenership, and then readership, and then ultimately influence. And people turn to other places.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's an even more dangerous game. or equally dangerous.
All right, here's a question. How much are you getting paid right now to do this podcast?
No, nothing.
Nothing. How much am I getting paid to do this podcast? Nothing. How much are we charging people to listen to this podcast?
It's equal to our pay.
We have zeros across the board. Why is that? Because we're trying to give people an opportunity to hear other voices that are not owned by corporate entities. That's what we're talking about.
Well, that's another troubling piece that we get from the Washington Post. And by the way, I say it's from the Federalist by way of the Washington Post. And the headline says it all. Washington Post's Paul Farhi shows professional journalism can't be salvaged is the headline. It goes on to say the Washington Post and other media outlets are not failing to get the story right, as they would suggest with all their foundations they plan to do in light of the 2024 election, help us get it right. No, they're not failing to get the stories right. They're doing exactly what they set out to do. And that gets into the ownership.
Yeah.
That is clearly setting the agenda, and the foot soldiers are following.
Well, and the reason that it's important to establish if we have any credibility in this conversation is you've been in talk radio for 30, how many years?
35
years. We started daily on talk radio in 1989. All right. So let's see, however many years that is. We've been doing this a long time. Now, our model at the Public Square is a nonprofit model, and you're blessed to have a beautiful program called Your Morning Show on the iHeart Network that's spreading now across multiple states. We're very grateful for the opportunities that we have in radio. We get it. And what we're trying to say to people is we're not shilling for some company here so that you'll listen to us and not to them, or that you'll buy the stuff that we're advertising and not, because guess what? We're not advertising. And if you take a look at the Public Square broadcast site, what you'll find is no banner ads, no clickbait, nothing, nada, doesn't exist. We don't sell access. What are we doing here?
Can I ask a question? Is any of this surprising you? Because I want to just say something as a friend. When you were building the American Mission Center outside of Cleveland, and I was standing there, my heart and mind was filled with the thought, this is a safe haven, because someday there's going to be a need for a safe haven.
It's going to come down to this.
And I, hindsight is always 20/20, or as I like to say, life has to be lived looking forward. Unfortunately, it's understood best looking back. At the time, in my soul, I felt like the room was on fire, but I didn't understand it. I have found that God has brought me to iHeart as my safe place, and it's brought the Public Square to the Mission Center for its safe place. Both house a lot of people that need to be protected, but the rest, they're on the warpath.
Well, and people are hungry and they're hurting. And I can tell, I mean, here's the great irony about the Associated Press story. Look, where did this word misinformation come from?
You disagree with me? That's misinformation. Because there is no truth, right? So you have to have something new.
And if you disagree with me, it's not if we disagree on the facts. If we disagree at all, you're misinformation. And so you are branded. I mean, the stuff that I have seen this year from reporters who rejecting clear facts and truths because it didn't fit into their narrative or it didn't fit into the parent company's agenda. And we're now talking about stuff like life and death. You were recently on your morning show, you spoke about the Oregon initiative that the people voted on to decriminalize all forms of drugs.
Meth, heroin.
Everything. And now they've got people dying on the streets every day in Oregon.
In Oregon, overdose deaths have gone from, it's multiplied 13 times, from 200 and something to 700 and something, now over close to 3 a day. So now the same margin that voted this law, I think it'd be a good idea to just, meth, heroin, whatever. Now they're saying, bring this back up to vote. The same percentage is saying we need to reverse this. But at least they're getting it.
But when the people in Ohio are considering the same sort of consideration of we just passed a ballot initiative, maybe this isn't going to work out maybe we better find out what would it take to overturn this. The Associated Press instantly brands the stories as misinformation and instantly said that the pro-life community is anti-democratic because they're not listening to the will of the people. This is exactly what America was founded to not be. A country that's based upon public opinion polls. And they swing back and forth and back and forth.
You abandon truth. So then it becomes about information. And if you agree with me, you're informed. If you disagree with me, you're misinformation. This is as old as arguments with stubborn people, though, right, David? How many times have you been giving a fact to somebody? They go, well, you're misunderstanding me. No, you're refusing to acknowledge my position. Nobody's misunderstanding anything here.
Yeah,
this is about control.
We're never all going to agree. We never have agreed. We didn't all agree on the American War for Independence. We didn't all agree on the Declaration of Independence. We didn't all agree on the Constitution. We get that. The beautiful thing about our system of government is it gives the people who disagree the same rights as those who hold a majority opinion, and that we're able to continue the dialogue and find out what works best and make up for our mistakes if we can be honest about it. But if everything's branded misinformation by the Associated Press, I don't know, man. I don't know how we get home from here.
How about our founding fathers who once again were right hundreds of years ago? They're still the smartest in the room, if we'll listen.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.